for centuries has protected Poland. Restore the independence of our country forever and ever. These are the words of a patriotic hymn, once banned by Poland's communist government, but now heard everywhere in Poland. It has been this way since October 1956. Since October 2, American-style jazz is background music for Polish-style jokes. Jokes openly kidding the communist regime. What is the difference between capitalism and communism? Answer: under capitalism, man exploits man. Under communism, it's just the reverse. October 1956 could not, it is true, wipe out wartime memories of inconceivable Nazi brutality. But the events of October did bring new hope at last to the people of Poland. In November of 1956, Poland's communist leaders conferred with Soviet leaders in Moscow. 1 month earlier, Soviet tanks had threatened Warsaw. Gomulka, the new Polish leader, told the Russians to go home. Khrushchev, the Soviet leader, backed down. Gomulka and Poland had won a decisive battle, the Battle of October 1956. To understand the meaning of October, we must go back more than 20 years to September 1st, 1939. September 1st, 1939 was the day Nazi bombs began World War II. Within a week, Hitler's armies had bitten deep into Poland. Within a month, it was over. Adolf Hitler, the conqueror.
Hitler! Hitler, aber ist Deutschland, wie Deutschland Hitler ist! Hitler, Sieg! Sieg! Sieg!
It was a new kind of war which had engulfed Poland. The Blitzkrieg, lightning warfare. Fast-moving German tanks had crushed Polish resistance. And then it was the turn of the Soviet Union. Units of the Red Army crossed Poland's eastern frontier, rolled westward, and the next day joined the Nazis at Brest-Litovsk. A salute, a handshake, and a nod. It was an old story to the people of Poland. Conquest, subjugation, enslavement. It had happened before in Poland's troubled history, but never with such inhumanity. But now the tides of history had turned, and the two nations which had divided Poland were themselves at war. By the summer of '44, Soviet troops were sweeping the Germans back all along the Eastern Front, and the Red Army was flooding into Poland through the gates of Warsaw itself. But here, the generals of the Red Army halted their advance. During the long years of occupation, the AK, the Polish Home Army, had fought the Nazis. Its record was known to the world. Now, in August of '44, with the Soviet armies less than 10 miles away, the time seemed right for a general uprising of the underground. The result was tragedy. For 63 days, while the Red Army stood by and did nothing, the Warsaw Underground fought a hopeless battle with the German army. German occupation, Soviet liberation. To the people of Warsaw, there seemed little to choose from. May 7th, 1945. The armies of the Allies, the United Kingdom, the United States and France, the Soviet Union join up. This was victory in Europe. But now, the complex and subtle problems of the peace. And Poland was to become the first concern at the conference table. At Yalta, before the war's end, the Big Three, the United States, Russia, and England, discussed Poland's future. Throughout history, Joseph Stalin said, Poland had been a corridor through which Russia's enemies had attacked her. Thus, the Soviet Union must annex eastern Poland, and in exchange, Poland was to get part of eastern Germany. These boundary changes were made, but free Polish elections, also part of the Yalta Agreement, were never held. Poland, already occupied by the Red Army, was taken over by Polish communists, backed by Soviet power. Thus, the post-war years revealed Joseph Stalin's grand design, the reason the Red Army had refused to help the Polish underground. They were not communists. But Poland was not alone. In the words of Winston Churchill, wartime leader of England, from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe, and all are subject, in one form or another, to control from Moscow. Thus emerged a period of suspicion, abuse, recrimination, the Cold War. As for Poland, there was the staggering task of clearing the rubble of war and rebuilding. Although many Poles felt the war's end meant for Poland the exchange of one tyranny for another, they set to work with an astounding will, determined to know, once again, the uses of peace. Physically, considerable progress was made. Poland began to rise from the ruins. Then, on the night of March 5th, 1953, Joseph Stalin, leader of the communist world, was dead. And the man who would take his place was not in the front rank of mourners. But 3 years later, Nikita Khrushchev was to attack Stalin's memory. In a secret speech, Khrushchev spoke of Stalin's capricious and despotic character. Stalin, he said, had ordered thousands of innocent persons arrested, tortured, and shot. In addition, Khrushchev said, Stalin supported the glorification of his own person. Stalin's death and Khrushchev's bitter condemnation of his policies were to have a profound effect throughout Eastern Europe. The city of Poznania in Poland is in many ways like cities everywhere. In its public parks, mothers and grandmothers take the air, gossip in the sun, and, if need be, rescue their children from the growing menace of traffic. Yet it was here in Poznania, a city of some 350,000 people, that an event occurred which shook the communist world to its foundations. It began at Zispo, a locomotive factory named, ironically enough, after Joseph Stalin. On June 29, 1956, 15,000 Zispo workers marched through the quiet streets. But what started as a strike for higher wages became a riot and threatened to develop into a revolution. The armed rioters were finally stopped. But the uprising revealed the bitter unrest, discontent, and poverty of the Polish people under communism. Only 12 young men were brought to trial for firing on members of the UB, the secret police. Most of them were acquitted. It was a popular decision. For between the Poznania riots in June and the trial in December, a lot had happened. In a word, October. Poland, led by Władysław Gomułka, a communist, had defied Khrushchev and the Soviet army. 5 years earlier, Gomułka had been imprisoned by Joseph Stalin for telling the Polish people what he now told them once again. Poland's independence must be respected. A tremendous wave of hope swept the nation. October was to be the beginning of a better life. The theater of Warsaw, once the vehicle for grim propaganda plays, now blossomed out with political satires and with imports from France and America. Polish artists once had to imitate official Soviet painting. After October, they too asserted their independence. Polish youth became interested in everything under the sun, particularly the Western sun. October had been, in part, a revolt of the intellectuals, musicians, poets, scientists. Students, it is said, had been armed and ready to fight Soviet tanks. After October, they and their teachers felt intense pride once again in being Polish. But mostly, perhaps, October was an attitude. This was Poland again. We can talk, laugh, grumble, Poles said. We can even crack jokes about the communist regime. And, if they were so inclined, Poles could open up small stores and shops. Privately owned business, in other words, was to be permitted. On a larger scale, there were changes on Poland's farms. During the 5 years of Gomulka's imprisonment, many Polish farmers and their families had been forced to pool their land, labor, and resources into huge collective farms. After October, more than 8,000 collectives were disbanded overnight. Along with the return of farms to private ownership came the free markets. Farm families, no longer forced to sell in government-owned stores, could now sell in the open market. This, then, was Poland after October. With Gomulka leading, anything seemed possible. Except for one important thing. Joseph Stalin's memory could be attacked. Communism itself could not be attacked. These are scenes in Budapest during the Hungarian uprising. Hungarian army units refused to fire on the people. Barricades were erected in the streets. But then came the Soviet tanks. It was soon over. The Hungarians had appealed to the West for help. That help, which they expected, did not come. Refugees poured across the borders. In all, more than 186,000. For Poland, Hungary's fate was a shattering warning, and Gomulka drove his point home. The Soviet Union could not be pushed too far. Poles could not depend on the West. They must recognize necessity. And necessity for the great mass of Polish people meant one inescapable fact. Poland's economic life is not in Polish hands. Many Poles work in mills and factories planned and built with Soviet aid. The Soviet Union is Poland's biggest customer for steel and coal, her major exports. More important, perhaps, is the Soviet determination that the nations lying on her European border be oriented to communist philosophy. There may be deviations, but they must be minor deviations. Thus, October did not mean a return to capitalism. Private enterprise is allowed as a temporary measure, but taxes are high and government regulations restrictive. It is becoming increasingly difficult for the small Polish businessman to stay in business. Nor did October mean any lasting change in Poland's farm program. After October, the Polish peasant was allowed to till his own land once again, but sooner or later, Poland's farms will undoubtedly be pooled to form large-scale collectives, Soviet style. There are other things which October did not mean. This is the ancient city of Gdansk. It was once Polish, then German. Between the two world wars was a free city and is now Polish once again. This is a coal mine in Upper Silesia, a rich industrial area. Before the war, it was German and is now Polish. And here are some of the 3.5 million Germans who, at the end of the war, were expelled from this region.
Hitler aber ist Deutschland, wie Deutschland Hitler ist. Hitler, Sieg! Sieg!
The problems of Silesia are complex. Poles insist that justice is on their side. And moreover, they have the military backing of Soviet troops garrisoned in Poland. Thus, October did not change Polish fears of a rearmed Germany, nor the dependence of the Polish government on Soviet power. Władysław Gomułka believes that communism and Polish alliance with the Soviet Union are the answers to Poland's problems. However, Poland, Gomułka insists, must proceed along her own road to communism. Poland's road to communism implies, Gomułka says, complete religious freedom. One of his first acts after October was the release from prison of Stefan Cardinal Wyszynski. Wyszynski, like Gomułka, had been imprisoned by Poland's Stalinists. Now they are the nation's two most powerful men. The Catholic who cannot believe in communism, and the communist who cannot believe in God. Stalinism, the long years of Stalinist rule, is spoken of in Poland as the terrible past which may lie before us. By this, Poles mean that their future is uncertain. After October, the communist economic planners made efforts to improve Poland's production of consumer goods. Later developments, however, indicate plans once again to concentrate on the buildup of heavy industries. In much of Poland, war damage is still oppressive. Politics aside, inadequate housing is perhaps the most irritating day-to-day problem the average Pole has to live with. Families of 3 and 4 often live in one room. As for Poland's intellectuals, her scientists, artists, students, they have, as one American observer put it, freedom of conversation and free youth are interested in everything Western. On the other hand, Poland's newspapers are not free. They are completely controlled once again by the Communist Party. What do the people of Poland want? One Pole, at least, has put it this way. We lived on our knees for 6 years under the Germans and for 12 more under the Russians. Now, if we can have freedom to talk and freedom to work, we won't ask for more, except for one thing: freedom to be Polish.